The recent great Gulf Coast oil spill and all of the marine life that it destroyed was a tragedy. Brothers and sisters, when you look around us in the world in which we live, we can plainly see that none of us are immune from tragedy. As a matter of fact, in one way or another, all of us have been formally introduced to tragedy. And we notice that there are two things that tragedy brings. Number one, tragedy brings loss. We saw that in the account of Job's life. He lost everything. The Bible told us initially that Job was the wealthiest or richest man in all the East. And by the space of one day, he went from being the richest man in the East to the poorest man in the land, because tragedy brings loss. But not only does it bring loss of substance, but sometimes tragedy brings a loss of your health. When you flip over to chapter 2, you see that God and Satan is involved in another conversation about Job. And this time Satan told God, let me put my hands on him. If you let me touch his flesh, I'll make him curse you to your face. God gave him that allowance and only said, just don't kill him. And when Satan went out, the Bible says he struck Job, which means he hit him hard with sore boils from the top of his head to the crown of his feet. And Job had lost his good health. He was sitting in a trash heap, scraping himself with a broken piece of pottery. And the only friends at that point that Job had was the maggots that would crawl in and out of the putrefying sores in his flesh. And so tragedy brings loss, but it also brings loneliness. It was after the account that Job's wife asked him, why are you still holding fast your integrity? Why don't you just curse God and die? That when Job told her, you talk like a woman who don't know God. And after that, we hear no more from Job's wife. It is if she abandoned him. It was as if she had left him to suffer all of that tragedy alone by himself. We understand that through the introduction of tragedy, it brings loss and it brings loneliness. So not only have we been introduced to tragedy, but I also think I ought to warn you this morning that none of us are immune to tragedy. What I mean is that tragedy is not a respecter of persons, no ma'am and no sir. Tragedy does not discriminate. It will visit the rich man as well as the poor man. It will come to the educated man as well as the uneducated man. It will make its presence known to the who's who of society as well as the nobody knows who on Skid Row. It will come to the sinner, but then it will also come to the saint. Nobody is immune from tragedy. Nobody can escape the vices of its grips. And so, since all of us are subject one day to have an encounter with tragedy, the question that we're seeking to answer this morning is, can God trust you with tragedy? What we really want to know this morning is that if tragedy strikes, will I still be able to maintain a faithful relationship with God? Can God trust me to keep my hand in his hand throughout a series of unfortunate events and circumstances? What we need to know this morning is, can God depend on me to still be there for him when tragedy makes it appear as though he's not there for me? The question this morning is, can God trust you with tragedy? Some of us may shudder at the mere thought that God would allow us to experience something so terrible, something so devastating that it would alter the very course of our life for the rest of our lives. But before you attempt to lay blame on God, allow me to introduce you once again to this man in this story named Job. Job was a man who the Bible testifies who served God faithfully. Nevertheless, Job got caught up in a debate between God and Satan, and Job didn't even know that the debate was going on. God was going to prove to Satan that man will serve him faithfully even if he lost everything that he had. And Satan was trying to prove to God that man only serves you when you're paying him. What an awful accusation Satan made against man and God. What a terrible assessment of man's devotion to his master. For Satan to look at the actions of man and come away with the conclusion that the only time we'll ever be devoted to God is when God is giving us what we want. It actually forces us to ask and answer the question, can God trust me with tragedy? We need to know this morning whether or not we're going to make Satan out of a lie, or whether or not Satan is going to make us out of a lie. We need to know, what will we do if tragic circumstances come into our lives? Here in the book of Job, my brothers and sisters, I saw 3 reasons here in the text why God knew he could trust Job with tragedy. And as we study these 3 points this morning, I want us to honestly look at ourselves. Look inside of you. Look at the man in the mirror and see if what God says about Job can be said of you. And if what God says about Job can be said of you, then the answer is yes. God can trust me with tragedy. How did God know he could trust Job? Well, first of all, God knew that Job was his. Hello in here. That's how God knew he could trust Job with tragedy, because God knew that Job was his. Listen to how God refers to Job. Look back at chapter 1, Job chapter 1, and beginning at verse number 6. The Bible says, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, whence cometh thou? Literally, where you been? What you been doing? Notice here, Satan answered and said, he's been going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. God knew that Satan wasn't taking a casual stroll here. He was looking for somebody's life to tear up. He was looking for somebody's life to destroy. Satan does that today. You may not see him walking around physically, but he got some boys, he got some girls, he got some homegrown cool. He got some folk out here on his side that walk around, and they do that very thing. They're walking and they're looking for somebody's life to destroy. God understood that, and therefore he says, have you considered my servant Job? God knew what he was doing. God knew that Satan was looking for somebody he could get his hands on. God wanted to know, have you looked at my man Job? Now watch what God says about Job. Verse number 8. There is none like him. Y'all hear that? Can you imagine the type of life Job must have lived for God to say, there's none like him in all the earth? Y'all hear this? Watch this now. A perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. First of all, I told you that God knew he could trust Job with tragedy, because God knew that Job was his. And God indicated that he knew Job was his when he said to Satan, have you considered my servant? Hello in here. Job had a personal and intimate relationship with God, to the degree that God recognized the fact that Job was his